Why do the United States continue to support Israel unconditionally, even when the whole world seems divided, outraged, and confused? Why does this support remain firm across decades, governments, parties, and global crises? The short answer is, it's not just politics. The real answer is much deeper. It's spiritual, prophetic, and biblical. We live in a time when everything is explained in economic, military, or strategic terms, but C.S. Lewis already warned us. The enemy's greatest victory was convincing the world that there is no spiritual battle. And that's exactly what happens when we observe the relationship between the US and Israel only through the lens of geopolitics. We are looking at the effects and not the cause. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and activate the bell. You may not realize it now, but what we are going to reveal today completely changes the way you understand politics, faith, and the role of nations in God's plan. In this video, we're going to do something different. Let's go back thousands of years in time, not to Washington, nor to London, but to Genesis, to a promise made by God that remains active, alive, and operative. A promise that has not expired. A promise that does not depend on public opinion. A promise that shapes the destiny of nations. In Genesis 12:2-3, God says to Abraham something that echoes to this day. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse. This was not a poetic metaphor, it was a spiritual principle. Israel does not appear in the Bible merely as one nation among others. It appears as an axis, a point of convergence between heaven and earth, a stage where God chose to reveal his redemptive plan to the world. C.S. Lewis wrote something that helps us understand this clearly. God acts in history. He enters time, works within it, and directs it to an end that only he sees completely. If this is true, and the Bible affirms that it is, then nations are not moved solely by human interests. They also respond, consciously or not, to spiritual laws. Now think about this. What if the United States' support for Israel is not just a diplomatic choice, but a response, however imperfect, to an ancient spiritual principle? What if the prosperity, global influence, and protection that the US has experienced over the last century are, in part, connected to this alignment? These questions are unsettling, and they are unsettling because they take us out of the comfort zone of secular thinking. But stay with me. Let's delve into the Bible, modern history, and an event that changed the course of the world in 1948, which many ignore, but heaven has never ignored. Comment now. Do you believe that God still acts in the history of nations? This simple answer already reveals a lot about how you see the world. Before any modern state existed, before there were parties, armies, or diplomatic treaties, there was a promise, and this promise wasn't born in Washington, nor in Tel Aviv. It was born in the desert, when a man heard the voice of God and decided to obey. If you want to understand why Israel occupies such a central place in history, and why the United States aligns itself with it almost unwaveringly, you need to go back to Genesis. There is no other way. The Bible makes it clear that Israel doesn't arise by chance. It is born from an irrevocable covenant, reaffirmed to Isaac, then to Jacob, and sustained even when the people repeatedly fail. The faithfulness here is not human, it is divine, and that is exactly what bothers the modern world. We live in an era that tries to explain everything only by economic interests, oil, military power, or regional influence. But the Bible doesn't only work with visible causes, it reveals spiritual layers that operate behind history. C.S. Lewis wrote something profoundly relevant here. Human history is the history of God repeatedly entering and interfering with human freedom. Israel is one of those points of interference. Throughout the centuries, empires that tried to erase Israel simply disappeared. Babylon, Assyria, Rome, the Third Reich. They all fell, and Israel did not. It remains persecuted, almost exterminated, and yet preserved. This is not a historical coincidence. It is living theology. We move forward to the 20th century. After almost 2,000 years of diaspora, the improbable happens. Israel exists again as a nation. Isaiah 66:8 asks, "Can a nation be born in a single day?" For on May 14, 1948, the answer was given. And here comes a detail that many ignore. The United States was the first nation to officially recognize Israel. Not after months, not after years, but in minutes. President Harry Truman, a man deeply influenced by the Bible, is said to have stated that he saw himself as a new Cyrus, the Persian king used by God to allow the return of the Jews to Jerusalem. Cyrus was prophesied by name in Isaiah 44-28, 150 years before he was born. Truman knew this text. He understood the spiritual weight of that moment. It wasn't just diplomacy, it was discernment. And here we take a strategic pause, because this matters to you who are watching now. Do you believe that history is just a random sequence of events, or that there is an invisible thread connecting human decisions to divine purpose? Leave your comment. This helps us bring this content to more people. The promise made to Abraham carries a simple, yet devastating principle. Nations that bless Israel prosper. Nations that curse it reap the consequences. This does not mean that Israel is morally perfect. The Bible never stated that. On the contrary, it records errors, rebellions, and severe judgments on the Jewish people themselves. But there is something non-negotiable. The covenant remains. C.S. Lewis said, God does not erase his promises when men fail. He fulfills them despite them. That is why the relationship between the US and Israel cannot be understood merely as a strategic interest. There is something deeper at work, a consciousness, especially within American Christianity, that messing with Israel is messing with the very axis of biblical history. This perception has shaped generations of leaders, pastors, voters, and political decisions. Millions of Christians in the United States read the scriptures not as distant allegory, but as a prophetic map. For them, supporting Israel is not optional, it is obedience. It is not just about agreeing with all the decisions of the Israeli government. It is about recognizing the unique spiritual role that Israel plays. And this generates tension. The modern world wants to separate faith from politics, but the Bible never made this separation absolutely. Kings, nations, and empires have always been under divine evaluation. When the US sides with Israel, many see it as merely geopolitics. Others see it as an echo of Genesis 12. And the question that begins to emerge, silent but powerful, is this: what happens to a nation when it decides to break with the spiritual principles that have sustained it? This question leads us directly to the prophecies of Ezekiel, Zechariah, and Revelation, and to Israel's role as the epicenter of end-time events. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now. What follows may completely change the way you view world news. If there is a point on the world map where heaven and earth seem to touch, that place is Israel. Not just because of its history, nor just because of its geography, but because God decided to write the timeline of humanity there. And this is where many get confused. Because when we look only with political eyes, we see conflicts. When we look only with military eyes, we see territorial disputes. But when we look with the eyes of Scripture, we see prophetic fulfillment in motion. C.S. Lewis wrote something profoundly revealing. Human history is the long and terrible story of man trying to find something besides God that will make him happy. Israel is living proof of this. All the nations that have tried to solve Israel without God have failed. All of them, without exception. The prophet Zechariah in 12:2-3 declared something that resonates powerfully today. I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling to all the surrounding peoples, and I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone. All who try to lift it will be injured. Stop for a second and reflect. Why has a city the size of an average neighborhood become the center of global decisions? Why do UN resolutions, regional conflicts, and diplomatic crises obsessively revolve around it? Because God warned that it would be so. Jerusalem is not just a city, it is a spiritual test for the nations, a kind of dividing line between obeying or resisting the divine plan. What we see today between Israel and its neighbors did not begin in 1948, nor in 1917, nor in the Ottoman Empire. It began in Genesis. Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, two lineages, two destinies, two worldviews. The Bible never romanticized this conflict. It revealed it with brutal honesty. And that is precisely why the prophet Ezekiel describes something that seems frighteningly current: the war of Gog and Magog. In Ezekiel 38 and 39, we read about a coalition of nations rising up against Israel in the last days. Many scholars associate these ancient names with modern regions of the Middle East and Eurasia. The text is clear on one central point: when Israel seems isolated, God himself will intervene. The ancient names correspond, according to many scholars, to regions now identified as Persia, today Iran, Put, today regions of North Africa, Gomer and Togarmah, associated with Turkey and surrounding areas. The most disturbing detail: God says that he himself will draw these nations to Israel, not to destroy Israel, but to reveal his glory. then you will know that I am the Lord. That is, the conflict does not end with human diplomacy. It ends with direct divine intervention. Where do the United States fit into all this? Here, the subject becomes sensitive and profoundly revealing. The Bible does not mention explicitly the US by name, but many scholars believe that absence can be as significant as presence. Why? Because there are three frequently discussed future possibilities. The US remains supportive of Israel. The US becomes politically neutral or weakened. The US ceases to be a global superpower, regardless of the interpretation. One thing is clear: the stance of nations toward Israel has spiritual consequences. C.S. Lewis warned, "A nation cannot remain great if it loses its soul." This phrase has never seemed more relevant. We are closer than it seems. Jesus said something many prefer to ignore: "When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that its desolation is near." Luke 21:20 wasn't just talking about a historical event. It was pointing to a recurring pattern. The world closes in on Israel. The pressure mounts. The narratives are reversed. Good is called evil, and then God acts. It's not panic. It's not sensationalism. It's spiritual vigilance. And here's the question that can't be avoided. If all this is true, if Israel is God's prophetic clock, and if the nations are being weighed on the spiritual scale, where are you in this story? Because biblical prophecy isn't meant to feed curiosity. It's meant to provoke repentance, alignment, and decision. Let's face the most uncomfortable question of all. What happens to the nations and to the people who choose to resist God's plan? If this content is making sense to you, like the video now and write in the comments, "I am paying attention to the signs." If up to this point we've talked about spiritual covenant, promise, and strategy, now we enter an even more delicate and inevitable territory: the prophetic dimension. Because, whether we like it or not, the Bible doesn't treat Israel merely as one nation among others. It places it as the spiritual epicenter of human history, and that's exactly why Jerusalem is never out of the news. Zechariah wrote something that today seems to have been written for the 21st century. "I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling to all the surrounding peoples, a heavy stone for all the nations." Note carefully, all the nations, not some, not a few, but all. The question is, why does such a small strip of land concentrate so much global tension? Because, biblically, Jerusalem is not just geography, it is living theology. It is at this point that many ignore a crucial detail. Prophecies do not happen in a spiritual vacuum. They manifest themselves through human decisions, political alliances, wars, and moral choices. And the United States, whether its critics like it or not, has become a central piece on this chessboard. C.S. Lewis warned that the devil sends errors in pairs. One is denying the spiritual world, the other is obsession without discernment. Here, we need balance. It is not about reading prophecy as paranoia, nor about ignoring it as an ancient myth. Ezekiel 38 and 39 describe a disturbing scenario: a coalition of nations rising up against Israel. This changes everything. Under this lens, US support for Israel ceases to be merely diplomacy and becomes a spiritual stance. This is why so many American Christians see this alliance as a choice between alignment with or departure from the divine plan. And here comes an uncomfortable but necessary question. What happens to the nations that try to move the heavy stone? The Bible doesn't answer with vague threats, but with historical patterns. Empires that persecuted the Jewish people disappeared. Babylon, Rome, the Third Reich. None withstood the test of time. History screams. And those who have ears to hear realize that Israel is not just a political issue, it is a sign. Before continuing, I invite you to do something simple but powerful. Stop for a moment and reflect. Have you looked at this conflict through a spiritual lens, or only through the media narrative? If this reflection is already affecting you, leave a comment right now. Your participation strengthens this community of truth seekers. Next, we will conclude this study by looking at the prophetic future, the role of Israel in the final events, and what this means for us, individually, as Christians in this decisive time. Don't leave now. What comes next is essential. We have reached the point where all discussion needs to be put back in its proper place. After history, geopolitics, alliances, wars, and prophecies, one essential question remains: what does all this demand of us as Christians? Because, in the end, the Bible was not written to satisfy geopolitical curiosities, but to transform hearts. C.S. Lewis wrote something that resonates deeply here. The history of the world is not at its core the history of nations, but the history of souls. Israel, the United States, the Middle East, global conflicts, all these are backdrops, the stage, but the central drama is spiritual. It is the struggle between light and darkness, truth and deception, obedience and rebellion. The Bible makes it clear that Israel occupies a unique role in this drama, not because it is morally perfect, but because it was sovereignly chosen by God to carry promises that culminate in Christ. As Paul states in Romans 11, God's gifts and calling are irrevocable. This prevents us from falling into two dangerous extremes. The first, of idolizing a nation. The second, of rejecting what God has clearly established. The biblical position is neither emotional nor ideological. It is obedient. When the United States supports Israel, many see only strategic interests. But, in the light of Scripture, there is something deeper, an alignment, conscious or not, with a prophetic thread that runs through Genesis, the prophets, the Gospels, and Revelation. This does not mean that every political decision is just. It does not mean closing our eyes to human suffering. On the contrary, Christians are called to love the truth, defend justice, and weep with those who suffer, but without ever denying what God has declared. Zechariah makes it clear, Jerusalem will be a burden to the nations. Whoever tries to move it will be hurt. This is not a threat, it is a warning. C.S. Lewis warned about the danger of interpreting the world only through human lenses. The greatest trick of evil is to convince man that he is merely political, economic, or biological. We are spiritual. We live in a universe laden with eternal meaning. Would the support of the United States for Israel, therefore, be a political blank check, or a humble acknowledgement that God acts in history, and an acknowledgement that resisting this action has consequences? The book of Revelation does not end with the victory of a nation, but with the return of a king. Jesus Christ does not return as a symbol, but as Lord, and he treads on Jerusalem. This is not poetry, it is a promise. In the end, all human alliances will fall, all flags will bow. Only one question will remain, as C.S. Lewis wrote in Mere Christianity: are you on the side of the author of history, or trying to rewrite it? And now, the question is for you who are watching. Do you see world events only as news, or as signs? Do you interpret Israel only as a modern state, or as part of an eternal plan? Do you live as a spectator, or as someone spiritually awakened? If this video broadened your understanding, leave your like now. This helps the channel continue bringing deep biblical content. Share it with someone who needs to see beyond the surface of events. And write in the comments, do you believe that support for Israel is only political or prophetic? Here at C.S. Lewis Mastery, we remain firm in a commitment to think deeply, to believe biblically, and to live with eternal hope. Because, in the end, as Lewis himself said, hope is not an escape from reality. It is the only way to face it in its entirety. Until the next video, may God grant you discernment, courage, and faithfulness.